Max Kaiser in Paris, let's bring you on this as well. Of course, before we move on to the specifics of Greece, Spain or Italy and how they're involved in the European debt crisis, our guest there in London saying that instead of talking about refinancing, recapitalising banks, for instance, we need some fundamental changes. What are those changes, and will those changes be discussed?
Well, I think the overall concern about the euro and the eurozone is misplaced. If you're looking at a real trouble spot in the global economy, the UK and Japan are really the most troubling countries in the world for reasons I can get into. The eurozone is really not in the bad shape that the policymakers tell us it is in. They are basically extorting us into accepting things like transforming the European stability mechanism, the new financing fund, into a bank, which allows them to get 10 to 100 times leverage to recapitalize and refinance 5 to 10 trillion euros in debt. Of course, that'll make a lot of bankers fabulously wealthy. The people who don't have any political power now will continue not having any political power. But I don't see the euro breaking up, really, because they have a lot of path to go in terms of leveraging the European Union. The two countries that do look like they're going to explode and go the way of all flesh are the UK and Japan. Those are really the hot spots we'll be talking about in 6 months, not Europe.
Right. So, Max Kaiser, are you saying then that the European leaders, rather than letting Greece leave the eurozone, they would prefer to give it a revised second bailout worth at least 130 billion euros, and that they can afford that?
The goal of the Troika, that includes the IMF, the EU, and the ECB, who incidentally got the Greek government to sign off on what's called the memorandum, which passed sovereignty from Greece to the IMF. Remember, George Papadreou, the leader of Greece at that time, was going to have a referendum on that. And then the Troika, these three entities, told him that he was not going to have a referendum, so he did not put it in front of the people, something that the president of Iceland did a couple of years ago, and the people voted down being occupied by foreign bankers, and as a result, that country is now thriving because they got rid of their banker infestation problem. But Greece, unfortunately, gave their sovereignty away to the Troika, so it's not up to Greece to leave the euro. They don't have that choice. They're not a sovereign state. The IMF is there every single day monitoring with hundreds of agents around the country, and the goal of the Troika is to acquire Greeks' assets, their income-producing assets, the ports, the lottery, the airports, the toll roads, to acquire these assets for next to nothing for the benefit of the patrons of the IMF. And this is going along great. It's working. It's working beautifully. But don't think, of course, I agree with Simon Dixon. It would be great for Greece to leave the euro. Yes, of course, that would be fantastic. But they don't have that choice. And they're not going to, because it's not up to them.
Max Kaiser, we've heard a lot now about the European Central Bank taking steps to tackle this debt crisis. And those steps we're hearing are things like a liquidity program or rate cuts. First of all, do you think that this is going to help and that we are going to actually see the European Central Bank be able to do something about this? Because at the same time, we have a former president of the World Bank, Robert Zoellick. He's saying that monetary easing is not going to help resolve the problem.
Well, the European Central Bank is already doing something. They are swapping toxic assets from these banks all over Europe in exchange for fresh, treasury paper, short-term treasury paper. They're expanding their balance sheet to accommodate a lot of toxic debts. And they are also engaging in artificially suppressing interest rates. And this is being done all over the world in programs like quantitative easing. This is to keep interest rates low, to keep the debt service on the junk that these central banks are taking on manageable. But it is causing a two-tier global economy where the added liquidity needed to take on this toxic debt is driving asset prices of the top 1 or 2% of wealth owners higher. So paintings, rare paintings, yachts, exotic islands, all of these prices are going up because of all the money that the central banks are using to keep interest rates low. But because interest rates are low, the savings return and wages are also low. So there's no fresh capital being earned. And you can't have capitalism without capital. So what you end up with is a system that's is post-capitalism. It's a system of command and control run by central bankers, by and for central bankers and their friends. Look at what happened to Ireland. Before the crisis, Ireland had very little public debt. After the crisis, the government agreed to transfer 10 times the country's GDP in debt from Anglo-Irish Bank, one bank, onto the government's balance sheet, and then to pay that debt, the government imposed austerity. Now, if we were in the back alley of a ghetto somewhere, that would be called a lynching, or a robbery, which is this is all that we're talking about. It's a gang rape.
Max Kaiser, banks, the main problem here, would you agree?
Well, the crisis today is an echo of the crisis of the 1920s, the crash of 1929, and then the depression that followed the crash of 1929. Now, when Franklin Delano Roosevelt came into office, he declared a bank holiday, he revalued the dollar, he put together the Pecora Commission to investigate banker crimes, and hundreds of bankers went to jail. And he set the stage, he brought about Glass-Steagall, and he set the stage for what became known as the American century. Now contrast that to Barack Obama. He comes into office after a similar banking crash. Everyone said that the crash of 2008 was just very similar to the crash of '29. And what did Barack Obama do? He kept Larry Summers, Tim Geithner, and Ben Bernanke in office, the three primary architects of the crisis. He went out of his way to kowtow to Wall Street. He embraced Wall Street. He did the exact opposite of FDR. Barack Obama will go down in history as the American president that killed America.